First, let's begin with a notorious criminal whose actions are deeply disturbing. You might recognize him as the Milwaukee Cannibal, the Milwaukee Monster, or simply as Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, a name synonymous with terror and moral degradation, was an American serial killer and sex offender. Born on May 21, 1960, Dahmer's reign of terror extended from 1978 to 1991, during which he brutally took the lives of 17 young men. Acts of a disturbing nature, including violating corpses, dismemberment, sexual assault, and even cannibalism, formed his horrific pattern of behavior. The facilitator for Dahmer's descent into darkness was his parents' separation in the summer of 1978. Left alone in the family home, he gave in to the disturbing thoughts that had plagued his mind. When he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, Dahmer invited him back to his father's residence, supposedly for a drink. Tragically, when Hicks decided to leave, Dahmer violently attacked him with a heavy object. However, it was in Wisconsin in 1985 that Dahmer's crimes took an even more sinister turn. He frequented gay bathhouses, manipulating unsuspecting men, drugging them, and subjecting them to assault while they were unconscious. Although he faced arrest twice for indecent exposure in 1982 and 1986, he managed to evade charges for his more atrocious actions. He engaged in unspeakable deeds with the deceased bodies, taking explicit photographs of the dismemberment process and carefully preserving them as outrageous souvenirs. Dahmer's run-ins with the law increased when he was detained for drugging and engaging in inappropriate conduct with a 13-year-old boy at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory where he worked. He received a sentence of 5 years probation, 1 year in a work release program, and was required to register as a sex offender for this offense. Shockingly, this punishment did little to discourage his violent tendencies. Jeffrey Dahmer was apprehended on July 22, 1991, after luring 3 men from a bar to his residence by offering them $100 each for explicit photographs. Tracy Edwards, one of the men, accepted and entered Dahmer's apartment. Inside, he noticed an odd smell and saw containers of hydrochloric acid, which Dahmer claimed were for cleaning bricks. This led to a chain of events that allowed Edwards to escape from the room and contact the authorities.
Did you ever stop to think that this is someone's brother, nephew, uncle, cousin, grandson, or just someone's friend?
I hope you can deal with what you've done. I'm trying hard to. You almost destroyed me.
The horrific extent of Dahmer's crimes became evident when investigators discovered 74 photographs that methodically documented the dismemberment of each victim.
Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker. I hate you.
The chief medical examiner, upon reviewing the evidence, chillingly remarked, "It was more like disassembling someone's museum than an actual crime scene."
Don't f*** me, Jeffrey. I'll kill you. God look at me, motherfucker.
What's your name, Jurors, I am now going to read your verdicts to you.
On July 25, 1991, Dahmer was officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, with an additional 11 counts of first-degree murder added on August 22, 1991, relating to his crimes committed in Wisconsin. In the end, on January 13, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder. An emotional illustration of the pain inflicted by this troubled man on the world is seen in the victim impact statement from Errol Lindsay's older sister. You can almost sense her torment through the screen. She despised this disturbed and morally bankrupt man with every fiber of her being. Ultimately, justice prevailed as the judge faced the overwhelming task of imposing an appropriate sentence on Dahmer. Overwhelmed by the severity of the crimes, the court handed down multiple life sentences, totaling 957 years in prison. In an almost symbolic twist of fate, Dahmer met a violent end on November 28, 1994, suffering severe head trauma after being attacked by a fellow inmate. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer serves as a chilling reminder of the darkest aspects of the human psyche. Next, let's turn to the story of Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., a criminal whose actions, much like Jeffrey Dahmer's, are deeply unsettling. In the mid-1970s, an unidentified individual embarked on a disturbing crime spree that would haunt California for more than a decade. This person, later known as the Golden State Killer, or the East Area Rapist, left behind a trail of devastation, committing over 45 sexual assaults and 12 homicides. The first documented attack occurred on June 18, 1976, in Rancho Cordova, a suburb of Sacramento. A woman was victimized in her own home, unaware that this marked the start of a terrifying nightmare. Over the next 2 years, the Golden State Killer instilled fear in the hearts of residents in Sacramento and Stockton, carrying out a total of 38 assaults. Initially, the attacker targeted vulnerable women living alone in single-family homes. However, over time, his wicked tendencies darkened, and he began targeting couples. He would systematically restrain the male partner before subjecting the woman to appalling acts of abuse, with these ordeals sometimes lasting for hours. In a bold display of arrogance, he allegedly sent a letter to the Sacramento Bee and the mayor of Sacramento in 1977, which contained a poem titled Excitement's Crave, suggesting that Sacramento make an offer for a movie about his life to fund his planned exile. The arrest of the Golden State Killer in 2018 marked a long-awaited breakthrough in a perplexing cold case. Detectives employed a unique method to catch this evasive criminal. They utilized genetic technology that millions of consumers were already using to trace their family ancestry. Law enforcement conducted secret searches of privately held DNA data by 2 for-profit companies, bypassing their privacy policies. 6 counties brought charges against him, and he was officially charged with 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping, a list that took the judge a staggering 15 minutes to read in its entirety. To understand DeAngelo's actions, it's essential to explore his background. He led a seemingly ordinary life.
On April 15, 1982, I woke up and found my father dead. He was in his bed. He had died of a massive heart attack. I believed that he died of a broken heart. If I hadn't been raped, I thought my father would still be alive.
Hiding his sinister likings behind a mask of normality, the revelations of his true nature left his friends, neighbors, and even his own family in shock. What set the Golden State Killer case apart and fascinated the public was the connection between the criminal and his victims. Unlike many serial offenders, DeAngelo didn't match the typical profile of someone who randomly preys on individuals. Consider the suffering these victims endured. For one victim, Elizabeth Snelling, the night of DeAngelo's attack was her most dreadful experience.
I was told by the detectives that since I was the only living witness to my dad's murder, there was a chance he could come after me. The police gave us extra security and patrolled our neighborhood every night to keep watch on our home, but I still lived in fear.
In the early hours of September 11, 1975, a masked intruder startled 16-year-old Elizabeth Snelling awake. She found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. Her father, Claude Snelling, heroically sacrificed his life to protect his daughter. In the aftermath, Elizabeth and her family felt vulnerable despite taking enhanced security measures, such as staying in the same house with added precautions. Elizabeth spent the following year sleeping in her mother's room. Finally, the conclusion of this disturbing tale arrived with DeAngelo's sentencing. Fortunately, he didn't contest the court's decision. He admitted his guilt and accepted a plea deal to remove the death penalty from consideration. Instead, he received 26 life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 8 years. He would spend the remainder of his life in prison. However, such a monstrous series of events led the victims to question the value of his apology. In the words of Ken Smith, the brother of Katie Maggiore, who was tragically murdered in 1978 along with her husband, "After your sentence, you will be forgotten. You hold no more significance in my family's life. You can no longer harm anyone." Now, we shift our focus to the story of Katherine Knight, whose crime may seem less extreme compared to the others on this list, but the gruesome details of her actions could rival scenes from a Stephen King horror movie. Imagine an individual with a disturbing liking for violence. The chilling events that emerged in this narrative are not the stuff of Hollywood gore scripts, but a horrifying reality that unfolded closer to home. In the peaceful Australian town of Aberdeen, nestled in New South Wales, one of the most dreadful crimes in the nation's history took place over 2 decades ago. On the surface, Katherine Knight appeared to be an ordinary mother, hiding the darkness within her beneath her wavy red hair, gentle demeanor, and warm smile. Born in Tenterfield, New South Wales in October 1955, she had a troubled upbringing in a highly dysfunctional family marked by domestic conflict, excessive alcohol consumption, and allegations of sexual abuse. Before her tragic involvement with John Price, Knight's 4th victim, she had a history of riotous relationships marked by extreme violence. Her first marriage to David Kellett began with a shocking act of aggression when she attempted to strangle him on their wedding night after their intimate encounter. Another disturbing incident followed during her pregnancy, where she burned all her husband's clothing and struck him on the head with a frying pan after he returned late from a darts competition. Later, Knight entered a relationship with David Saunders in 1986, which was spoiled by a violent attack with a frying pan and scissors during a heated argument. She even killed his 2-month-old puppy in front of him to prove what she would do if he ever cheated on her. Tragically, it was John Price who became Knight's final victim. On February 29, 2000, Knight launched a brutal attack on Price, her partner. What followed was a nightmarish scene of unmatched violence that deeply shocked even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. She mercilessly stabbed Price 37 times, dismembered his body, and engaged in gruesome acts. Yes, you read that correctly.
They showed the video of the crime scene in court, and it's perhaps the most horrific video you would ever wish to see. It's just unimaginable.
She handled him after his demise with such a level of expertise that it stunned the police. She even consumed some pills, indicating a possible suicide attempt. It's essential to note that Knight had a history of violence against Price.
Probably the worst bit of the video was when they went to the stove in the kitchen and you see the gloved hand of a forensic policeman take the lid off the pot on the top of the stove, and inside it's Price's head staring back up at the camera.
In 2000, she once impaled him after an argument. He attempted to secure a restraining order against her, which proved unsuccessful. He even told his colleagues at work that if anything happened to him the following day, it would be her fault. Tragically, his gloomy intuition became a reality. Knight's crime exceeded all believable bounds of human evilness, resembling scenes from the most horrific horror films. She left a note insinuating that her husband had sexually assaulted their daughter.
I can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
Although this was later proven to be untrue, after her arrest, Knight displayed no remorse.
And I was around washing up, and it could have been a fork, a spoon, or anything in my hand. It was a knife that cut your meal with, and I aimed it at him, and it got him.
For her monstrous actions, she faced a murder charge, pleading not guilty and claiming a lack of memory due to a dissociative state, attempting to distance herself from the unimaginable brutality.
Although Katherine had displayed this bizarre behaviour, committed this absolutely shocking and horrific crime.
However, she did recall stabbing him 6 months earlier, and the casual manner in which she spoke about it was chilling. The undeniable evidence against her left no room for doubt, firmly establishing her guilt. During the trial, the prosecution depicted Knight as a cold and calculated killer, presenting evidence of a disturbing history of violence. On the other hand, the defense tried to portray Knight as a victim herself, shaped by a traumatic past. However, in the face of compelling evidence, the judge pronounced Knight guilty. As a consequence of her atrocious actions, Katherine Knight received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, making her the first woman in Australia's legal history to receive such a punishment. Knight's atrocious crimes deeply impacted Australia, serving as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse, regardless of gender. Richard Ramirez, famously known as the Night Stalker, was a notorious serial offender whose wave of fear swept through California during the 1980s. Born Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez's path toward becoming one of America's most infamous criminals was marked by a challenging upbringing and a series of severe crimes that deeply shook the nation. Ramirez's criminal journey began when he dropped out of school in the 9th grade. In 1977, he encountered his initial brush with the law, facing charges related to substance possession. This incident set the stage for an escalating pattern of criminal behavior. Relocating to California, Ramirez developed a drug addiction and turned to burglary, often neglecting personal hygiene. The Night Stalker's first documented murder transpired on June 28, 1984, when 79-year-old Jenny Vincow tragically lost her life during a burglary at her home. This act of violence served as a disturbing introduction to a series of horrors that would unfold over the following year. Ramirez's crimes escalated in brutality. On March 17, 1985, he targeted Maria Hernandez and her roommate, Daily Okazaki. While Hernandez managed to escape, Okazaki tragically lost her life. The same night, Ramirez took the life of Tsai Lian Yu, earning the moniker Valley Intruder. A mere 10 days later, the Night Stalker struck again, this time claiming the lives of Vincent Zazzara, 64, and his wife Maxine, 44. The couple endured a horrific attack, with Maxine's injuries including a unique aspect of Ramirez's method. In an attempt to evade capture, Ramirez fled to San Francisco in August 1985. Nevertheless, his appetite for violence remained unsatisfied. On August 17th, he violently took the lives of Peter and Barbara Pan, creating further terror in the city and enforcing his reputation as the Night Stalker. As the pace of his crimes accelerated, law enforcement worked relentlessly to put an end to his reign of terror. On August 31st, 1985, Ramirez's rampage came to an abrupt halt when an outraged mob recognized him from media coverage and detained him until the police arrived. Thus, the Night Stalker's brutal spree came to an end, but the legal process was only just beginning. He faced charges of murder, attempted murder, sexual assault, and burglary.
A woman in her 60s and stomped her to death with his foot, leaving an imprint of a shoe on the side of her face. From that to just executing somebody upon walking into a room after he entered a house.
The drama surrounding this case was so intense that over 1,600 potential jurors were summoned for his trial. In the late 1980s, the lengthy trial unfolded, leaving the audience deeply disturbed as they heard horrific details. Jury members were confronted with unnerving testimonies.
In the course of his 1989 trial for multiple murder, the haughty looks and bad attitude of serial killer Richard Ramirez inspired a startling new brand of cult appeal among many of the nation's disaffected youth.
Recounting acts that included harm to victims and near decapitation. Throughout the trial, Ramirez captivated the public with his disruptive behavior, displaying symbols on his palm and using obscenities in an attempt to disrupt proceedings. Despite his antics, the prosecution built a compelling case, supported by the testimony of survivors and a fortune of incriminating evidence. Unfortunately, he had developed a following of individuals who were fascinated by his persona. He cultivated an image of a rebellious rock star-style figure and attracted a strong female fan base. He displayed no remorse for his actions and reportedly told his cellmate, "I've harmed many people, man. I find satisfaction in violence." Ramirez's trial spanned an entire year, but the legal process was delayed by pre-trial motions and appeals, lasting an astounding 4 years. This case secured its place in U.S. history as one of the longest criminal trials on record.
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. I cannot answer it at this time.
In 1989, Ramirez's trial concluded with his conviction on multiple charges, including murder, sexual assault, and robbery. On November 7th, he received the long-awaited sentence, the death penalty, which meant he would face execution in California's gas chamber. However, Ramirez displayed no remorse or regret, indifferently remarking, "Death is an inevitable part of life." Following his conviction, Ramirez revealed his true nature by making a devilish hand gesture and uttering a haunting word, evil. Richard Ramirez's reign of terror left a lasting impact on the lives of his victims, their families, and the communities he terrorized. He later gave in to liver failure while on death row before the gas chamber could carry out his execution. Joaquin Guzman, known by his aliases El Chapo and El Rapido, rose to fame as the leader of the infamous Sinaloa cartel, a well-known Mexican drug trafficking organization. However, his criminal activities came to an end when he faced a federal jury in Brooklyn. Guzman Lara faced a long list of charges. In 1993, he was charged in Mexico for offenses related to murder and drug trafficking, leading to a 20-year prison sentence. Yet in 2001, he managed to escape from prison and regain his position as the cartel's head. He was arrested once again on February 22, 2014. However, in 2015, he orchestrated another escape from the Altiplano Federal Maximum Security Prison in the state of Mexico. His getaway was quite elaborate, involving a tunnel. In his prison cell, he appeared to be simply adjusting his sandals, but he was actually using a hidden tunnel to make his exit. However, in 2016, Guzman was captured in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, and subsequently extradited to the U.S. The charges against him included drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder, all directly linked to his role in leading the Sinaloa cartel. During the trial, the prosecution presented compelling evidence to establish Guzman Loera's crucial position within the Sinaloa cartel. Testimonies from 14 cooperating witnesses provided crucial insight into the cartel's illicit activities. To underscore the danger he represented, security measures during the court proceedings were extensive.
And the truth is, they didn't really fear that he was going to be able to tunnel out of an American courthouse or an American jail, but they knew that this man had resources and he was resourceful.
His transportation from his prison cell was conducted with the highest secrecy. Even the Brooklyn Bridge was temporarily closed during his transfer to ensure there was no traffic, and additional security measures were implemented in the courthouse. Guzman Loera's influence extended well beyond Mexico, as he oversaw the smuggling of narcotics to wholesale distributors in various U.S. cities, from Arizona to Atlanta, Chicago to Los Angeles, and Miami to New York. The cartel's reach was vast. Guzman Loera spared no expense in facilitating the narcotics entry into the United States. Law enforcement officials recounted multiple instances of intercepting large quantities of substances directly linked to the Sinaloa cartel. One notable bust involved the discovery of over 7 tons of cocaine, cleverly obscured within cans of jalapenos. His alleged involvement in murder was also brought up during the courtroom proceedings. Mr. Valdez Rios, Guzman's former bodyguard, provided a chilling account, describing the brutal murders of 3 members from rival drug cartels that he witnessed firsthand. The victims were accused of changing sides from the Sinaloa cartel to join the rival Los Zetas cartel, leading to their immediate apprehension. Their torment lasted for over 3 agonizing hours, with the notorious drug lord subjecting them to ruthless beatings, reducing them to lifeless figures. Guzman cursed each individual before ending their lives with a gunshot to the head, after which he ordered his men to burn the bodies to erase any evidence of their existence. Throughout his reign, Guzman Loera appeared untouchable, evading capture for a significant period. However, unrelenting efforts by U.S. law enforcement agencies ultimately led to his extradition from Mexico to the United States, where he faced trial for his crimes. He received a life sentence plus 30 years. Guzman tried to appeal the sentence, citing concerns about the jury, but his efforts were in vain. Guzman El Chapo remains imprisoned to this day. In the Kent County Circuit Court, Tatiana Fasari faced Judge Paul J. Sullivan on charges related to the tragic death of her baby daughter, claiming obedience to a religious diet and asserting that she did not notice her child's severe malnutrition. This is the story of Tatiana Fasari, a mother who, in Michigan, faced charges of first-degree murder and child abuse for the starvation death of her 10-month-old daughter, Mary Welch. On August 2, 2018, in Solon Township, Kent County, Michigan, a heart-wrenching tragedy unfolded. Mary Ann Welch, a 10-month-old infant, tragically lost her life due to malnutrition and dehydration. What made this tragedy even more tragic was the revelation that Mary's parents, Seth Welch and Tatiana Fasari, were held responsible for her untimely passing. This is a tale of neglect, influenced by religious beliefs and a deep distrust of the medical system. Mary's brief life, spanning from October 23, 2017, to that fateful day in 2018, was marked by significant challenges. Child Protective Services had been involved with the Welch-Fasari family since 2014, when a marijuana component, THC, was found in their firstborn system. It was an ugly sign of the unfolding horrors. At the time of her death, Mary Welch weighed a mere 8 pounds, stark evidence of the severe neglect she had experienced. Astonishingly, her parents were well aware of her alarming underweight condition, but shockingly refused to seek medical assistance. They mentioned religious beliefs and a profound mistrust of the medical establishment as their reasons.
The final witness you will hear from is the medical examiner, and he's going to tell you that her cause of death was malnutrition with dehydration because of the neglect of her adult caregivers. Her manner of death was homicide.
It's important to note that 2 out of their 3 children had never been seen by a licensed doctor. During the initial investigation, the county sheriff described the family's living conditions as extremely unhygienic and difficult to tolerate. The Welch-Fasari home was plagued by vermin, insects, and mold. The autopsy report revealed a grim truth. Mary had endured chronic malnutrition brought about by the cruel denial of food and water. In the aftermath of this tragedy, Child Protective Services took swift action to terminate the parental rights of Seth Welch and Tatiana Fasari. Eventually, justice was served. In June 2020, Seth Welch was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a sentence that ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. In 2021, Tatiana Fasari testified in court, introducing disturbing allegations of abuse, including physical violence by her husband. She asserted that she had been prevented from seeking medical attention for her daughter and attributed her inability to care for Mary to the abuse she endured.
He got mad at me because I wouldn't let him sleep. So
she was prevented from caring for her child the way that she wanted to. Threatened to kill her?
I pick Mary up and I put her on the changing table. And I perform CPR on her.
How long did you perform CPR in there?
I don't know.
However, she maintained that she had not understood the extent of Mary's illness and remained unaware of the cause of her daughter's tragic death. As the legal proceedings continued, justice was once again served. In November 2021, Tatiana Fasari received her sentence for her role in Mary's death. She displayed some emotion and regret in court, silently sobbing as the jury announced their guilty verdict on both counts of first-degree murder. However, the legal process had one more chapter to write in this disturbing narrative. Fasari was also handed a 15 to 30-year sentence for first-degree child abuse, a penalty that reflected the severity of her actions. Her tears flowed freely as she came to terms with her sentencing. In contrast, Seth Welch wore a stunned expression, his mouth hanging open in disbelief upon realizing he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For her role in the starvation death of her 10-month-old daughter in Michigan, Tatiana Fasari received a life sentence without parole and an additional 15 to 30 years for first-degree child abuse. At the Maricopa County Superior Court, we encounter Jodi Aras, who faced charges of first-degree murder for the brutal killing of her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander. Her claim of self-defense was overshadowed by compelling evidence that pointed to a different truth. Arias underwent a sensational trial that held the nation fascinated for 18 days, during which she offered frank, at times explicit, testimony in an attempt to convince the jury that her actions were in self-defense. However, her efforts were in vain. In a mere 15 hours of deliberation, the jury, comprised of 8 men and 4 women, returned a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. This gruesome crime pushed Arias from an unknown waitress and aspiring photographer to a household name, igniting a media frenzy and real-life thriller that rivaled any fictional movie. Despite the disturbing nature of the story, it drew in viewers and captivated their attention. The verdict, delivered in a muted courtroom, left Arias in tears while members of Travis Alexander's family wept and embraced, wearing blue ribbons with the words, "Justice for Travis."
Good morning, Judge Stevens. My name is Heather Schaefer. I am Travis's aunt. This is a picture of how I would like to remember my nephew. His trusting eyes, his effervescent personality, and his charming smile. Instead, I will be forever haunted by visions of his frantic and impossible attempts to cry out for his life through a severed windpipe.
Throughout the trial, prosecutors argued that the murder was committed in an exceptionally cruel and monstrous manner, potentially making Arias eligible for the death penalty. Both sides presented evidence and called witnesses. The aggravating factors were established, and the final penalty phase lingered between a life sentence and the death penalty. During the trial, Arias asserted self-defense, contending that Alexander had attacked her after a sexual encounter, and she had fought back, eventually resorting to a gun she retrieved from his closet.
As for not wanting the death penalty, it's my firm belief that death would bring me untold peace and freedom. That's my personal belief. If I died today, I would be free and I would be at peace. For years, that's exactly what I wanted.
However, her account was stained by inconsistencies, and her claims of physical abuse by Alexander lacked confirmation, regardless of her efforts to persuade the jury otherwise. It was evident that she had been the one who killed Travis Alexander. The trial was further complicated by the mystery of a missing .25 caliber handgun, the same caliber used in the incident, which had disappeared from her grandparents' home shortly before the killing. Authorities suspected that she had brought this weapon with her to commit the crime, but this detail remained unresolved during the trial. Throughout the trial, the courthouse witnessed its own spectacle, with spectators eagerly awaiting prosecutor Juan Martinez, who had gained celebrity status for his passionate cross-examinations of defense witnesses. The Arias trial reached a global audience, with thousands tuning in through live web feeds and engaging in discussions on social media. It transformed into a daytime soap opera for its keen followers, full of drama, intrigue, and controversy. Adding to the surreal nature of the case, Arias managed to sell her artwork from jail through a website operated by a third party, earning large sums. Given that she had not yet been convicted, no legal barriers prevented her from capitalizing on her newfound infamy. Jodi Aras appeared calm and expressionless as the jury announced her guilty verdict of first-degree murder. Her reaction consisted of a blink and a slight nod as the judge pronounced her sentence of life in prison without parole. She displayed minimal emotion and subsequently attempted to appeal her sentence. For the savage killing of her ex-boyfriend, Jodi Aras received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The case of Ohio pastor Anthony Haynes is a disturbing story. Haynes was found guilty of assaulting a juvenile girl over a period of several years, from 2014 to 2017. The assaults occurred in the Greater Life Church in Toledo, where he held a position of authority and trust. The victim was just 14 years old when the abuse began. Haynes was arrested and faced multiple charges. When pleading before the U.S. District Judge, he asked for mercy, but his plea went unanswered, considering the serious nature of his crimes. What makes this case even more horrifying is that Haynes wasn't the only pastor involved in this heinous act. He shared the victim with 2 other pastors. The victim stated that she allowed the abuse to continue due to fear and manipulation. Despite the strong evidence against him, Haynes did not admit his guilt. Instead, he repeatedly pleaded for mercy. His wife and stepdaughter were also charged with tampering with a witness. It's evident that this was a deeply troubling family affair.
He didn't say that he was going to be my protector and stuff, so I did end up living with the pastor and his family.
However, he started abusing her.
Every day coming home just expecting that I'm just going to have sex with him and anybody else that he threw my way.
However, the love and support of his family members did not sway the judge, who sentenced Haynes to life in prison for his crimes. Following the sentencing, Haynes appeared to show little remorse.
It was an emotional sentencing for Anthony Haynes with tears and more as he pled for mercy from the judge on behalf of his family who came in support.
I love my brother. That's it. He loves us. I love him.
I saw a pre-rehearsed, what I'd call almost sermon-like, and he almost made it sound like he was the victim.
As he was taken out of the courtroom, he continued to speak to his children, reassuring his love for them. The case of Strickland Floyd Strickland is certainly a complex and troubling one. Strickland was facing serious charges related to prostitution, including third-degree sexual assault, child sexually abusive activity, and human trafficking of a minor for commercial sexual activity.
Were you in the county of Kalamazoo, state of Michigan, between the months of January 2018 and June 1st of 2018?
Yes.
And at or about that time, that is during that time within the county, did you knowingly offer to sell transportation services to TH and or TJ that facilitated travel for the purpose of engaging in what would be a violation of the laws governing prostitution?
Yes.
The charges were particularly dreadful, as they suspected that Strickland had paid teenage boys to engage in inappropriate activities with his wife, Jasminique LaKendra Strickland. During his sentencing, Strickland expressed his belief that the accusations against him were part of a witch hunt to remove him from his position. He claimed that various individuals and entities, including members of the Democratic Party, the prosecutor's office, the NAACP, and even his own church had conspired against him.
Most of this propaganda has been launched by my relationship as the president of the NAACP here in Kalamazoo. This was a witch hunt and a lynching from the beginning.
Strickland's reaction to the plea deal was mixed. He chose to plead guilty to 1 felony count of facilitation of travel services for purposes of prostitution.
I do feel as though the prosecutor and his office have got a substantial deal in me being able to take this plea because I do not feel that they would have prevailed at trial, and I do not believe that the facts were on their side.
He criticized the plea agreement for not providing justice for the victims involved and questioned the fairness of a 1-year jail sentence without the requirement to register as a sex offender or serve probation. The plea agreement was indeed seen by some as relatively lenient, given the seriousness of the charges. It aimed to avoid subjecting the victims to further trauma by discussing the crimes in a public court, according to Kalamazoo County Assistant Prosecutor Kristen Mertens-Carlin. Strickland's criticism of the prosecutor's office and the outcome of the case added another layer of difficulty to this already complex situation. His claims of overcharging certain demographics and his overall reaction to the sentencing raised questions about justice, accountability, and the handling of such cases. The case of Strickland Floyd Strickland is a stark example of the challenges and controversies that can arise in the criminal justice system, especially when dealing with complex cases involving multiple parties and serious allegations. Williams Randall, a former pastor and political candidate in Clay County, Florida, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexual battery. Randall had been sexually abusing a victim since she was 12 years old. The abuse took place at church, in a church van, and at Randall's home. He told the victim not to tell anyone because it would ruin both of their lives. The abuse lasted for 6 years, and the victim suffered a stroke when she was 14.
And then very quickly turned his house of worship, his house of prayers, into a house of horrors.
She finally came forward to the police when she was 19. Randall was charged with 4 felonies related to sexual abuse of a child. He initially pleaded not guilty and denied any involvement with the victim. However, he later entered a plea deal and pleaded guilty to 1 count of sexual battery. The other charges were dropped. Randall was sentenced to 20 years in prison and will have to register as a sex offender. The victim was happy with the outcome of the case and said she was at peace knowing that Randall would not be able to hurt anyone else. The case involves a former youth pastor named Michael Mohler, associated with the First United Methodist Church in Troy. He faced legal consequences in a Troy courtroom for his actions related to a 15-year-old girl, leading to a felony sexual battery charge. Mohler was charged with inappropriate conduct involving a minor, revealing a break of trust within the religious community. Allegedly, Mohler first connected with the victim through the church when she wanted advice about her boyfriend.
It's disgusting. I just hope he gets what he deserves.
Their relationship evolved from there, including mentoring and inappropriate interactions that took place at his residence. The allegations surfaced in February 2013, leading to his immediate removal from the church. During the legal proceedings, Mohler stated that he never intended harm to the girl, her family, or the First United Methodist Church where he served. He expressed remorse and pledged not to engage in such behavior again. However, the county prosecutor, Tony Kendall, argued for a prison sentence.
Those that I hurt, it was never my intention to cause harm to her or her family.
Emphasizing the significant psychological harm inflicted on the victim. Kendall pointed to the extended duration of the inappropriate behavior and evidence of grooming in text messages. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Judge Christopher G. acknowledged the inappropriateness of Mohler's actions, but couldn't proceed further when the victim withdrew from the case. Kendall expressed concerns about external pressures, possibly from church members, influencing the victim's decision. Pastor David Lacrone of the First United Methodist Church denied any knowledge of pressuring the victim not to testify.
I don't want to lay all the blame on her. In talking with her from time to time, it was my impression that she was getting a lot of pressure from church members and other people related to the church.
He stated, "All I can say is that there was not any pressure I was aware of for her not to testify." Differing perspectives on the victim's involvement complicated the proceedings, leading Mohler's defense team to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecution. This resulted in an amended charge of aggravated assault, with Mohler surrendering his ministerial licenses. The original charge could have required sex offender registration, but the amended charge and his guilty plea for felony aggravated assault allowed him to avoid that consequence. In the end, as part of his sentence, Michael Mohler faced 5 years of court supervision and community control.
I truly know that this was a mistake that I made, and I can't take it back. But I know without a doubt that I will do everything I can, and I will never do anything like this again.
I don't want to lay all the blame on her. In talking with her from time to time, it was my impression that she was getting a lot of pressure from church members and other people related to the church.
I think it's disgusting. I just hope he gets what he deserves.
He was strictly prohibited from unsupervised contact with minor children, and any contact with the victim was forbidden. Additionally, he served 60 days in the Miami County Jail, aiming to protect potential future victims and ensure community safety. Next, we go to the sentencing of a former pastor in Georgia, Terrence Lamont King, who faced charges related to inappropriate relations with a minor. The victim, a young girl under his care, and her family had placed their trust in him, making his actions all the more shocking. Assistant District Attorney Mark W. Anthony expressed the severity of the case, stating, "He violated their trust within the entire church community by taking advantage of his position and manipulating this young woman. He made her believe they were in a dating relationship, exploiting her innocence and affection for his own purposes. Given the abuse of his position and status as a role model, we consider the sentence fair and just."
I will sentence you on that to life with the requirement that you do 30 years in the penitentiary with the balance of your life on probation. There'll be a $3,000 fine. Count 3 is an enticing a child. We'll do that one next. I will sentence you to 30 years required to serve 10 in the penitentiary. I will run that concurrent or at the same time as count 2.
The inappropriate relationship between King and the victim began when she was just 15 years old. King would engage with her at inappropriate times and locations. Fortunately, the discovery of their inappropriate communications by the victim's mother exposed the truth behind King's actions. The victim and her family had been dedicated members of the church for their entire lives, intensifying the sense of betrayal caused by King's actions. For several years, Terrence Lamont King served as the leader of a small church in Hawkinsville, Georgia.
I know that this whole experience has been tremendously difficult for this victim, and especially going through this trial. And I just want to say that I could not be more proud of her for doing this.
Following his arrest, King proceeded through the legal process related to the charges against him. Eventually, a jury found him guilty. Judge Edward D. Lukemeyer issued a strict ruling, emphasizing King's abuse of trust and authority. As a result of his actions, Terrence Lamont King received a sentence of 30 years in prison with a lifelong probationary period. In the next case, we dive into the sentencing of a former youth pastor in Alabama. In a disturbing case that has deeply affected the community, Acton Bowen, a 38-year-old evangelist and former youth minister, received the maximum sentence for 28 charges related to the exploitation of 6 teenagers in Etowah County. He faced charges such as second-degree misconduct, inappropriate conduct, enticing minors, traveling with intent to meet minors, and more. The investigation into Acton Bowen's misconduct began in April 2018, leading to his arrest in Jefferson County after a 3-week investigation conducted by the Hoover Police Department's Special Victims Unit. The victims, aged from teenagers to young adults, bravely came forward with allegations of extended exploitation, spanning from 2006 to as recently as April 2018. Their statements revealed a pattern of manipulation and abuse by Bowen, who used gifts, trips, and money to lure these vulnerable young individuals into spending time alone with him. One victim, through a statement presented during the hearing, described the profound impact of Bowen's actions, saying, "I saw myself as damaged without realizing I'd been manipulated by a true professional." The suffering these victims endured is difficult to understand. During the trial, Acton Bowen pleaded guilty, mentioning his desire to spare the victims from reliving the traumatic experiences he confessed to subjecting them to. In an emotional apology, he addressed the victim and their family, associating his actions with the grip of alcohol, drug abuse, and addiction to explicit content that had overwhelmed his life. Unfortunately, this apology came too late, as the damage had already been inflicted. Bowen's defense team argued that he had post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) due to his own history of abuse as a teenager, presenting witnesses who testified about his disclosure of the abuse to psychologists. They claimed that the effects of his victimization should be considered as a mitigating factor in his sentencing. However, the presiding Calhoun County Judge Deborah Jones remained resolute, handing down the maximum sentence for all charges. While the defense sought to use Bowen's history of abuse to stimulate sympathy, the prosecution, led by Etowah County District Attorney Jodi Willoughby, viewed this tactic as an attempt to divert attention and manipulate the situation in Bowen's favor. Willoughby emphasized the selfish nature of Bowen's actions, stating, "I just think it just reinforces Acton Bowen's selfish nature. It's still all about him." Additionally, it was revealed that Bowen faced extra charges of inappropriate conduct in Bay County, Florida, as the FBI collaborated with local law enforcement to investigate his interactions with teenage boys across state lines. The exact connection between these charges and another alleged victim remains unclear. Bowen's arrest in 2018 sent shockwaves through the Christian community in East Alabama, where he was celebrated as a local hero. He served as a chaplain for the 2012 Olympics, made appearances on major news networks, and positioned himself as a spiritual advisor to Hollywood stars, including Justin Bieber. Consequently, after pleading guilty to 28 charges, he got the maximum sentence for each charge to be served consecutively. The total amounted to an astounding 1,008 years. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.